Kylie. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says President Donald Trump threatened North Korea in order to send a strong message, quote, in language that Kim Jong-un can understand. Tillerson's comments come after North Korea threatened a military strike against the U.S. territory of Guam, which followed President Trump's comments.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Over the weekend, the United Nations levied the heaviest sanctions yet against North Korea. They were in response to two recent launch tests which showed North Korea has missiles capable of reaching the United States. A new assessment by U.S. intelligence believes North Korea has produced a nuclear warhead that can fit inside those missiles. Response to the president's threats were mixed.
Great leaders that I've seen, they don't threaten unless they are ready to act. Yeah. And I'm not sure that President Trump is ready to act.
It was very responsible of the president to say what he did. He was sending a clear signal to North Korea in language they could understand.
U.S. Air Force planes conducted missions over the Korean Peninsula this morning, along with Japan and South Korea. The governor of Guam said this morning that he'd reached out to the White House and he was told an attack against Guam is an attack against the United States.
WCCO chief political reporter Pat Kessler joins us now. Pat, many are wondering, is this just a game of political chicken here, or is this threat of military action real?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one I think that's raising anxiety all around the country. We've had 6-7 months of the Trump administration where people are not really sure what is real and what is not. This is another example of that. There are a lot of people who say it's about time that a U.S. president really drilled down and said, yeah, we're going to strike back. But it does raise some really important and possible dangerous questions about, does this begin a nuclear war? I don't know that we have ever heard, except for one president, Harry Truman, actually threaten a nuclear war. The president saying all of this while the Secretary of State is actually in Guam trying to keep everything a little cooler. He said this morning you can sleep well at night, but Americans all around the country woke up to the headlines, fire and fury, which doesn't exactly mean that people can sleep well. So a more disruption and unevenness, and I think it is raising a level of anxiety.
We don't know exactly what fire and fury means, but it sure sounds like escalating.
It sounds North Korean, doesn't it? It sounds just like what North Korea says to us.
The Secretary of State also said this morning, as you mentioned, that we should sleep well. But let's look at this new CBS News poll. I don't think America is sleeping well. When asked how they feel, how we feel about the North Korean situation, 72% of Americans are uneasy about the possibility of conflict with North Korea. And when asked about the president's ability to handle it, 61% say they're uneasy about President Trump's ability to handle this situation.
Well, this does again reflect this low-level sense of anxiety I think that people do feel, and most people in America apparently do feel, but there is also confidence at the same time in the people that President Trump has surrounded himself with, the military generals. Interestingly to me, we have not heard from the Defense Secretary, James Mattis. He has kind of stayed away from this. A lot of people say he is a real stable influence in all of this. And the ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, has been doing a lot of work, including what I think is a success for the Trump administration, getting the Security Council to impose sanctions on North Korea. A lot of people believe that is what's going to be the most effective, not bombing, not military action, which could spark a catastrophe, but these sanctions against North Korea. And this fire and fury comment could have been aimed toward China, not necessarily North Korea.
Pat, Minnesota Senator Al Franken was asked about Trump's threats. We want to share what he had to say.
Well, I mean, what he was basically doing is threatening nuclear war against North Korea. This is a time where any war with North Korea would be catastrophic, and that's not the proper message to be sending with them.
I mean, hard to know, I guess, what the right way to deal with North Korea is, but things have certainly been escalating, Pat.
Right. This has been something that many presidents have dealt with, and this is something that President Trump promised he would deal with when he was running for office. But Senator Franken makes a good point. Any kind of military strike against North Korea could spark a huge, massive casualty in South Korea, and also for people, perhaps as North Korea is threatening in Guam. And I don't think anybody wants to see that.
No, I don't think so. Okay, thanks, Pat. We'll see you later on our news at 5 and 6 o'clock tonight.
The music